I'm just super excited to be doing this. Super happy to have Joe with us, super happy to be doing the webinar, super happy to see the names of everyone that's in the room. Some names I recognize, some that are new to me. It's just very cool to have you all here. So for those of you who may be new to Psychedelia, just a little brief statement about us. Psychedelia Integration is a 501c3 nonprofit organization offering harm reduction education, emotional support, and community connection to people who are interested in the healing potential of psychedelic experiences. For more information, you can visit our website. You can find us on social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the normal ones. And now to introduce our wonderful speaker, Dr. Joe Tafur, MD, is a Colombian-American family physician originally from Phoenix, Arizona. After completing his family medicine training at UCLA, Dr. Tafur spent 2 years in academic research at the UCSD Department of Psychiatry in a lab focused on mind-body medicine. After his research fellowship over a period of 6 years, he lived and worked in the Peruvian Amazon at a traditional healing center. There he worked closely with Master Shipibo shaman Ricardo Amaringo and trained in ayahuasca shamanism. In his book, The Fellowship of the River, a medical doctor's exploration into traditional Amazonian plant medicine, through a series of stories, Dr. Tafur shares his unique experience and integrative medical theories. He's now helping to organize the Modern Spirit Epigenetics Project, a cutting-edge investigation into the epigenetics effects of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us. I'm now going to mute myself and hide myself and turn everything over to you.
Okay, thank you. Am I unmuted? I can't, now on the screen share, I can't see anything. What I see is the chat. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you for joining the webinar. Yeah, it's a little weird, but eventually I'd like it to be a little more interactive. So this is like a 90-minute exchange here. So my goal is not to speak for too long and to try to turn it into some kind of interactive thing, because it seems like what we need more interaction, less screen staring. But here we are staring at the screen. I'm staring at a screen. And so this is based on a talk that I gave at in Spain at the World Ayahuasca Conference. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different things I can talk about. You know, talking to Tara and Paul about psychedelia and what psychedelia is about, and kind of supporting people, seeking finances to support people's journeys into healing and integration. And so that's really awesome. And so, I mean, I'm all about that. But there's a context right now that I'm working in. What she just mentioned, the prohibition, etc. Trained in ayahuasca, shamanism, curanderismo, and so in order to bring that here, or work on bringing that there, you know, I am part of a church, a spiritual community, an organization that is interested in applying to the DEA for an exemption to be allowed to use it. And here in the States, the way Santo Daime and UDV and the way they do research as well through the exemptions. And so that church is the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. And at the World Ayahuasca Conference in whatever year that was, a couple years ago, or last year, I think, I presented my book in Spanish in Spain, and one of the goals of mine was, it was a book panel. So it was a talk that was kind of framed in books a little bit, and trying to tell the story of this prophecy, which I think is very interesting in this moment. So I'm gonna get into that, and then we'll open it up to questions in a moment. There we go. So you already heard my background from her. I'm from Arizona. I live in Arizona. I'm in Phoenix right now, but I lived in California for a long time. I kind of miss California and LA as well. Trying to turn these things and nothing's working. Here we go. So that's my book. She mentioned Fellowship of the River, where I present these theories and these ideas. It came out in 2017, and then 2019 out in Spanish, and now in a couple other languages. And it's the medical doctor's exploration of traditional Amazonian plant medicine she described. I'm not going to get so into all the details of the book as part of this talk, but we'll have time to answer questions, and if people are interested in that. The book's ultimate message is about acknowledging the emotional and spiritual dimensions of illness, which I think definitely sacred plant medicines are all about. And I think ultimately psychedelic psychotherapy also leads us in that direction. So at the conference, the World Ayahuasca Conference 2019, presenting the book in Spanish there, I was saying this is kind of a sign of the times to be there. It's weird to give a talk on a thing, but I'm continuing. The prophecy of the eagle and the condor. So this is the prophecy that our church community is based off, and it's an old prophecy coming through apparently different Native American sources here in the Americas, but this is one of the versions. Members of indigenous and modern cultures alike realize that we are living in a time of tremendous transformation. For indigenous cultures in the Americas, the ancient prophecy of the eagle and the condor embodies this revolution. The prophecy tells of a time when the people of the north, represented by the eagle, and the people of the south, represented by the condor, awaken to the realization that they are more capable of consciousness, love, and awareness when unified. In American shamanism, the union of the people is made possible by the parallel spread and unification of the ancestral medicines. So ancestral medicines of the Americas. So you see these teachings from Peru coming, whether that's Andean teachings or sweat lodge teachings spreading, or talking circle teaching spreading, or ayahuasca and the plant medicines spreading, etc. So the prophecy of the eagle and the condor foresaw this current awakening, as well as a period of materialism and violence that preceded it, a 500-year period beginning in approximately 1492. So one of the versions of the prophecy is told by this Pachacuti Mesa tradition of the Peruvian Andes, like a pre-Incan or Incan, something like that, Andean culture that had an astronomy that was predicting these different periods. And according to their astronomy, around the 1490s would start a 500-year period that, as mentioned here, will be marked by a period of materialism and violence. And then that 1490s would be a 20 or 30-year period called the Pachacuti. Pacha like Pachamama, and Pacha means earth. Pachacuti, turning of the earth, turning of the soil, like when you're ready to plant and they turn the soil. That turning of the soil opens up the 500-year era. And then that 500-year era ends with another Pachacuti, which starts in the 1990s. So we see, it was a book talk. So I mentioned these couple books that I find very interesting about the times before European exploration of the Americas. 1491, an amazing book about that time. Graham Hancock's book, I think, is really interesting, talking about all these different possibilities of what was here in Native America. So the prophecy states that in ancient history, this is another version, ancient history, the humans, I can't see it because my screen is blocking part of the thing, was split between those of the condor who pursued intuition, love, and connection with the Great Spirit, sometimes referred to as the feminine path, and those of the eagle who would pursue intellect, industrialization, and science, or the masculine path. The prophecy of the eagle and the condor found its way from the Amazon to Ecuador to Mexico, Central America, eventually to the Hopi and Lakota nations of the north. In the 1970s, as the prophecy spread, ayahuasca traveled out of the Amazon, San Pedro cactus descended from the Andes, and peyote extended itself out of the deserts. As a result, these sacred medicines, as well as the Temazcal ceremony from the north, the sweat lodge, as called in Mexico, Temazcal, Iboga from Africa, other sacred traditions are now available to millions of people from the diverse nations of the world. So it is interesting that these phenomena are kind of tracking the reported the prophecy. So the Pachacuti Mesa tradition says, 1490s, 500 years to about 1990. So let's say 1992 to 2022. So it's the era that we are currently in. Is this Pachacuti, this big shift, this turning of the soil, and it is kind of quite a momentous year, I would say, so far, this 2020. So one of the scholars of Pachacuti Mesa tradition is Don Oscar Miro Quesada. He said the defining feature of this nascent age, this current Pachacuti that we're talking about, is the extraordinary planetary crisis and upheaval to be seen in the Kai Pacha, this world, the realm of consensus reality in Quechua, tied to the cumulative effects of alienation, separation, and deep amnesia. This crisis characterizes both humanity and the world. The New Age brings the, quote, re-encounter of all the elements having suffered separation from humanity's prior unfolding. It becomes a time of coming together of peoples, ancestry, and traditions, along with the restoration of harmony between humankind and the many realms of Mother Nature and higher consciousness. So 1992 for me, and just tracking these kind of events of this Pachacuti, trying to see, making sure I'm not missing anything. There's no chatting. We're just moving along. 1992 is when I went from here in Arizona to college at UCLA and moved to Los Angeles. 1992 was also, I believe, the year that Nelson Mandela was released from South African apartheid. So that marks a major moment in a shift around European colonialism. Let's see what we're getting. Okay, European colonialism, and so it's just very interesting that it just tracked so well. Nelson Mandela is freed. Next slide. So then that brings us to 1996, or at least in my life, 1996. That's when I graduated from UCLA, from college. And in 1996, interestingly enough, here in Arizona, in the Grand Canyon area, which is considered connected to the Diné country, the Navajo Nation, one of the tribes here in northern Arizona, California condors, which were going extinct, were being brought over to be released. They decided that the Grand Canyon would be a good habitat for them to recover and regain their existence. And so the California condor has been increasingly flourishing in the Grand Canyon. For me, it's just interesting that right around that time, this North American condor that nearly went extinct, is a direct relative of the big Andean condors that we know, starts to come back. It's strange. I just put the spirit first comment down there because I go to some conferences with, one of my friends is Belinda Iracho, who is Navajo and Zuni. And, when we go and speaking with other friends of ours that are part of our community, the Church of the Eagle and the Condor here in Phoenix is a multicultural group that includes Native Americans as part of this group that's going to, eventually go ask for permission from the DEA. And they always say, we go to these conferences and talk about psychedelics and all this stuff, but the sacred plant medicines, the sacredness is lost a lot of times in some of the materialist discussion, this overly eagle discussion, you might say. And so they're saying, how come the science is always trying to catch up to spirit? That's why everything's screwed up. It said spirit first. The spirit's supposed to come first. And that's kind of this whole message of this Eagle and Condor period. So 1999 is when I went to medical school at UCSD in San Diego, and that's kind of where the Fellowship of the River, the book, begins and takes off in that story. So just kind of moving along into the Pachacuti. That same year, 1999, The Cosmic Serpent came out, Jeremy Narby's book, which I'm not sure who's familiar or not. Let's see what is being written. Enjoy. If everyone feel free to jump in questions if you want to chat. Yeah. Okay. Good. You got it. The Cosmic Serpent. So this is going to go like maybe 20 minutes more, or something like that, and then or less, and then we can open it up a lot wider. But The Cosmic Serpent was a very impactful book that opened up a lot of people to the Peruvian ayahuasca scene, including myself. I was very blown away by this book and was reading it while I was in medical school, interestingly enough. And then in 2000, DMT, the spirit molecule, came out, which was a really big deal, made a lot of waves. Subsequently, they made the documentary, DMT, the spirit molecule. And it kind of marked, it was a book about the psychedelic research renaissance, because that was the first in the early 90s, was when Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico reopened psychedelic research, was able to convince, the DEA and the powers that be to allow them to conduct some clinical research with human beings with DMT, a psychedelic molecule. And that led to the further exemptions that, we see and we hear about today, the MDMA research and the psilocybin research. It was restarted with this DMT research, Rick Strassman's work, after a few decades, 2 decades or more of complete shutdown prohibition in the research. So that was 2000 when he released the book and kind of got the public aware of this whole discussion that he tried to open up around the spirit molecule and all those ramifications. Around that time, for me in my personal journey in the book, I go through like, okay, I started medical school, have a hard time. And then I end up doing peyote here in Arizona and going to the Peyote Way Church of God around 2002. That was my kind of journey. So my first time with plant medicine, sacred plant medicine at that time, and sacramental use, ceremonial use of something that is considered psychedelic, but is really considered a sacred plant medicine. 2005, so I finished my medical school. I worked for a while, and I ended up back at UCLA and went back to LA to do my family medicine residency. And in 2005, this article came out in National Geographic Explorer. Was one of the authors, one of the writers, had gone down to explore ayahuasca, but not just to explore, but to go through to try to address her own depression. And she had a incredible experience, incredible healing experience, opened up this whole thing. And so this really, 2005, this article really blew up the ayahuasca tourism scene in Peru. It started to take off, and we saw a lot more. This book just came out, right? Like last year or the year before, I think it was last year early. How to Change Your Mind. They bring it up. So it's a very influential book in the psychedelic world right now. But I bring it up because, one thing that Michael Pollan in his kind of journalistic capacity did that I thought was really interesting. He pointed out this watershed moment that I was not aware of. No one had put that together for me, but I saw in his book, it says 2006 was a watershed year. That was the year that the psilocybin research around the mystical experience at Johns Hopkins, Roland Griffiths, very famous, that psilocybin can occasion a mystical type experience, having substantial and sustained personal meaning and spiritual significance. So that really opened things up at a major medical university program in the United States at Johns Hopkins. So it was a big, big deal. That same year, the UDV, the Unidade de Vegetal from Brazil, got their exemption to be able to use ayahuasca sacramentally within the United States and import it and continue their ceremonies. And in 2006, the LSD Symposium happened in Basel, Switzerland, the 100th birthday of Albert Hofmann, which I happened to get invited to, oddly enough, and through my friend who was doing psychedelic research in Switzerland. And there he introduced me to Jeremy Narby. And I got to meet Jeremy Narby and talk to Jeremy Narby and find out, because after my experiences with peyote, when that was in 2000, 2001, I returned to that a few times here in Arizona, the Peyote Way, and had an experience in Native American church. I became increasingly curious about ayahuasca, as my family's from Colombia. And I wanted to know what was going on down there in Peru and in that scene. So Jeremy kind of helped guide me, and I ended up going 2007 for my first time to Peru to go through a traditional Amazonian plant medicine culture, Shipibo healing, ayahuasca shamanism, and that's where I met Ricardo Maringo, who became my teacher later on and is a master healer in the Shipibo tradition, one of the Amazonian tribes from the upper Amazon of Peru. This is their artwork, their embroidery, considered to be the visualization of healing plant medicine energies, spiritual energies. So in 2011, along with the Pachacuti, I teamed up with Ricardo and Spita Mamich, and we opened up a center in Peru, a healing center in Peru. There it is from the air. You can see that little spot. That's Nihuerao Centro Espiritual, right up against a gigantic national forest in the Amazon. And that was a place where people came for healing, traditional plant medicine healing, traditional diets with Shipibo guidance, and ayahuasca ceremony. There we are in front of the Maloca. And here's in 2013, here's us with a group from the naturopathic school here in Phoenix. So we started having medical students, and from naturopathic schools also had medical students from MD programs and psychologists and different kinds of healthcare provider, Chinese medicine, coming to get exposed to and learn from Amazonian healers, Ricardo and the gang. There's Wheeler Noriega, who went on to run his own center and has his own, worked in Costa Rica for a while, now has another center. So this new age, according to the prophecy, brings this, quote, re-encounter of all the elements having suffered separation during humanity's prior unfolding. It becomes a time of coming together of peoples, ancestry, and traditions. So then they have the World Ayahuasca Conference in 2014 in Ibiza, Spain, and they bring some Amazonians over there. You know, interestingly enough, there's from this Spanish colonialization, you know, Spain taking over Latin America, where everyone now speaks Spanish, you know, where the native languages have been devastated. Although some people still speak Shipibo, Ricardo, the Shipibo language lives on. There's a few cultures that have kind of survived it, but largely decimated, when we talk about this era, this 500-year period of European colonialization and the destruction, where the Condor people go through their great suffering. But curiously enough, in 2014, the Europeans and the pan-European kind of diaspora is suffering in their own problems. This alienation and separation that has been brought up. I mentioned the prophecy, and they're looking for help, and they're seeking help from the same people, perhaps, that they previously did not appreciate, ignored, or even tried to destroy. So now Amazonian shamans and healers start getting invited over to Spain in 2014 to lead and share their knowledge and try to guide people towards a greater understanding. 2016, they decided to take the World Ayahuasca Conference to South America, where, it seems like, well, it definitely would be a lot easier to have a lot of Amazonians there. You don't have to fly them over, and they may not be as mobile financially. So they had a conference there in Brazil, in Rio Branco, Acre, Brazil, on the west side of Brazil, in the Amazon, up against Peru. And it was pretty incredible because you have these academic, doctors and lecturers and all these people right alongside many native people, Amazonians, in full feather headdress, on the stage, in the audience, feather headdresses galore, people painted. And it was just an incredible exchange that is it's a very interesting sign of the times. So that's where I presented the beginnings of my book. The next year I put my book out. I went to that conference and say, oh, I'm going to bring my book out. It's coming out. And then the next year it came out, and it was this doctor's exploration into traditional Amazonian plant medicine and talking about the work that we did. And from my perspective as a doctor, observing these traditional vegetalista diets, the way that the traditional healing format of the Shipibos and many of the other Amazonians is this very restrictive purification process, these dietas, this diet, and where people were also dieting these master plants, not just psychedelic plants, but plants that are regarded as spiritually potent. And then those people would, once they're dieting, and the case of Niue Rao at our center, they're dieting, they're taking master plants, then they enter ayahuasca ceremony, and there they receive healing song. And so the entire process is actually driven by healing song. So it's very traditional, very ancestral, very Condor, and this eagle and the condor. And interestingly enough, it's all these people coming from Europe and North America primarily, and they're coming with these diagnoses of mental health problems and physical health problems. And then, as I mentioned in the book, they end up going through a very deep emotional healing and are guided by spiritual techniques. And that's how they make progress with these problems that the Western world was struggling with. So I went out of my way to pick cases to present in the book that were the type of cases that I knew as a family medicine doctor that trained at UCLA, et cetera, that we struggle with. That those are the cases that people were not improving under our care. And so the PTSD and depression and psoriasis and Crohn's disease. Yet, as I mentioned in the book, it's like, well, the similar treatment was effective in this diverse cases. So to me, it implied a common physiology, that somehow these cases are all interrelated. They have the physiology of these cases are related in the flesh and their physical beings. But then you got to talk to them about their experience through the healing process, and talk to the shamans who are saying this is really kind of an energetic process and a spiritual process that these people had to go through, at the very least an emotional process. So I talk about how this is kind of a re-encounter with spiritual healing. That was my experience as a doctor. This kind of eagle and condor coming together was this re-encounter with spiritual healing and seeing really tangible results, treating the seemingly invisible elements of our experience, as I mentioned, our emotional experience and our spiritual lives, our sense of meaning and purpose, our belief system. So these are the areas that are really kind of what is being worked on largely in the psychedelic psychotherapy world as well. So, in the book, I get into the whole case about, where do these emotional and spiritual influences touch the flesh? How can we measure these things? How can, with the Ricardo and the shamans and what I'm learning about what we see in ayahuasca visions, where is that reflected? in the physiology and the biochemistry that the doctors talk about. And so I build a case that it's the emotional body, that it's real, the emotional body is real. And then the epigenetics, which is getting a lot more attention and is a focus of some psychedelic psychotherapeutic research. So in order to understand this complex world that stretches across, this pair of mind body and this pair of emotion and energy body, really the only way to understand it, I thought, was to really follow the patients and follow their stories and follow their case, and to see that's the holistic approach. Understand a real person going through the real thing, hear from their doctors, hear from the healers, the shamans, hear about their experience, watch what happens. And then there, in that story, we will see the intersection between biology, emotion, and spirituality through the story of their lives and their healing processes. So that's the point of the book. So for me, it's this thing where the ego and the condor are flying together again. Ayahuasca, curanderismo, psychedelic therapies are healing hearts and souls. The way the condor, the way we talk down there about people's energies and their hearts and their souls, that's reflected in maybe let me just skip just yet, reflected in what I call the emotional body, this physiologic network that's identified in emotional biology, and then the epigenome, the epigenetics. So we are, people are beginning to research that and try to show how deep spiritual and emotional healing may lead to changes in the epigenetics, and started learning about where spiritual and emotional healing touch the flesh. So here's the ego and the condor flying together again as predicted. 2018, everyone was worried we had the big election and all that stuff and all the trouble. But then we have this blue wave, and we see the largest number of women enter Congress in the United States in history. 2 Native American women enter Congress in 2018, also a very historical moment. Here's 2019. So I have my friends from, this is Naomi in the back, and then Belinda Racho up front, who are Navajo ladies. As I mentioned, Belinda is Navajo and Zuni, and they are people that honor the ayahuasca. They feel they had major healings with ayahuasca. And so they came down with me to Peru to speak to Ricardo and to offer their thanks and to kind of have an exchange between the tribes, north and south, to talk about what's going on and to thank the Shipibos for allowing this medicine to be shared and taught, into North America. It was a very beautiful experience, very ego and the condor moment. Then Ricardo in 2019, Shipibo shaman from the Amazon, growing up, really poor in the Amazon, from a culture that was largely neglected. First language is Shipibo, speaks Spanish with a bit of an accent, and comes up and becomes this major figure that runs a big healing center in Peru, a very successful person, and ends up getting invited to 2019 to go and speak and teach about his knowledge in Spain, which was a very magical and beautiful time. So all this, for me, has turned into like the culmination, and at least academically, the culmination is the Modern Spirit Epigenetics Project, which I do want to share about, and it is based in LA at USC under Dr. Rael Khan. So it is the MDMA assisted psychotherapy trial that MAPS is running, where we're seeing these revolutionary healings and changes in people's PTSD in response to MDMA assisted psychotherapy. Such a transformation, a transformative healing, that if there was ever a kind of change that would look like it probably has an epigenetic component, it would be the people going through that trial, because we know that PTSD is caused by emotional trauma. We know that the emotional trauma of PTSD is linked to epigenetic changes that stay with people, that are stabilized in them and are part of the ongoing chronicity of their disease or their health problem, their difficulty. And then that they go through this trial, and a very large majority of them end up, healing dramatically. So we are collecting saliva samples, and we've been raising money through the crowd fund, but we're struggling, and now we're in this COVID period. It's not so easy to raise money, but we still need a little bit more. But we have gotten to the place where in the virus, the parent study has been halted, the MDMA study. So we have enough numbers to start collecting the saliva samples at all the different MAP centers. And we're going to bring them together. And we're going to bring them here to Arizona to TGen, Genetics Research Center. connected to ASU, and we're going to analyze for epigenetic changes. So it'll be a really big deal, first of its kind type of study to take a look at that stuff, which to me, again, is a very eagle and condor thing, because my place in this study, my reason to even go into this, and as I talked about in the book, was very much inspired by my work with the plants and ayahuasca visions and all that kind of stuff. So that's described on modernspirit.org. And that brings us to 2020 in this Pachacuti. And you can see this year is just, really dramatic and very historical and very pivotal, and just amazing every day, the kinds of things that are happening and the way, I don't know, I leave it to the discussion, everything that we're seeing. So for me, it's just this culmination of the eagle and the condor prophecy that I wanted to share with you, and kind of use that to open the dialogue and the conversation. So I'd like to open it up to see if people have questions, or we can decide how we try to do that, come on video or just write and take it from there. So I want to maybe stop sharing my screen and go back to normal. How's that? Does anybody have a question? Or I can't hear anyone.
I'll jump in.
Oh, Q&A. We got a Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay, so I go to that. Oh, that's from Paul. Oh, very good. Thank you, Paul. The relationship between mystical experience and clearing, managing one's childhood trauma. My sense is that a mystical experience does not necessarily clear or release our triggers and traumas. How do you feel about it? And considering that, what is the value of regular work, say sitting once a month, versus 1 or 2 time experience, whether mystical experience happens or not? So yeah, so the mystical experience, that, was, it was a big deal that Johns Hopkins was exploring that, and they felt like the mystical experience was influential in their work. One of the studies they published around was tobacco cessation. So these are limited studies. I mean, the interesting part about the mystical experience was just that it even entered the scientific discussion, that people were entering spaces where they felt like they were beyond space and time, where they were, felt they were connected to an oceanic boundlessness, a lot of things that people describe through spiritual practice. And people were entering those kind of spaces, dissolution of the ego. And according to their research, then the people who did this tobacco cessation study, the ones that had the mystical experience were more likely to quit tobacco in this study. So then the people were very focused on, oh, wow, like this mystical experience is important. That's an important, place to hit, to bring change somehow, to decondition the person. And then the reality, right? So the reality is that a couple different angles, like the MDMA psychotherapy trial that I'm mentioning, they're doing 3 sessions. MDMA, like according to Rick Doblin and everyone at MAPS, like on the mystical scale, the Hood scale, they don't quite enter this mystical realm that that people do with psilocybin or ayahuasca or some of these other things. So apparently it's not so influential in the case of the MDMA psychotherapy. There was a subsequent study from that I saw. I need to read more about it, but the people at in London, King's College, I think it's Robert Carhart Harris, they were showing that emotional breakthrough, was really like maybe more important as far as some kind of transformative shift. But then there's the reality of treatment, that's what they're doing. They're going through the trial. They have a subset trial and 3 times 12 weeks of therapy. So a lot of therapy, primarily therapy. Their sessions involve therapy. And that's what seems to be doing it. And that the three sessions, facilitate that and maybe accelerate the effects of that. But that people just having one-hit mystical experiences like that, they're really changing or transforming, we're not seeing that much. I don't think the psychonauts are really kind of impressing everybody, with their ability to change. And so in the traditional Peruvian model, like in Peru, where, the idea of like a weekend of ceremonies leading to significant change, they disagree. They think that's very unlikely. So then the treatments there are longer, and involves this diet and this whole process and this retreat and this removal that, 10 days can be impactful. 2 weeks is more impactful. Somebody needs more help, they think a month, they think 3 months. So the idea is that, yes, I mean, sitting in over and over again, I don't want to talk about like going back to it. I think it's the integration process and making the most of your experience is crucial. So the way that it's talked about here in Arizona among like the church with the Navajo influence, and I bring this up like everywhere I go, rather than talk about set and setting and trying to figure out the details of that, they say that the way to approach the ceremony in your own mind and the way you set it up and all that stuff, the set and setting, is love. That you should be approaching it with love, and the way you prepare everything, the way you prepare yourself. The session itself is the gift. So that's the gift, that it can feel like more of a gift than other times, sometimes more than others. But that gift is this something then you have to work with. And that's called, then afterwards is what we call the integration. For them, they would call that the responsibility. So the responsibility of the gift, that you need to start learning how to work with this and make something of this and make use of it. And that's the traditional way around the diets as well in Peru and the Shipibo tradition. That's very, very, very important, that if you don't change your life, then nothing will change. And so these things can really facilitate that change. But it's going to take more than that. And I think that's just a basic fact. So now, next question. I got one here, Sarah Schwartz. In your opinion, from all of your knowledge, education, experience, can PTSD ever really be so cured that one is no longer affected by their triggers? I'm wondering if you can talk more about psychedelics such as Aya and psilocybin help PTSD. Well, I mean, I think that people can have dramatic improvement in their triggers. Yes. Like I mean, to have somebody who says the people from the trial, like the 70% ish that is saying they don't meet criteria for PTSD anymore after going through that kind of therapy, that these people don't feel like they may have triggers. Some triggers are like considered subclinical. Maybe everybody has a certain degree of trigger that isn't considered like a full-blown pathological process. I don't know that I'm still like triggered by things, but I'm not like suffering over that so much in my life. And so for people to fall below a threshold to where they can still function and achieve the things they want to achieve in life is kind of where we're all trying to get. So I do feel like people can get to that place with PTSD. I know many people that I think the first guy that I took down there to Peru was, I talk about in the book, is my friend Russ, who's a Vietnam vet. I think he would say yes. He's largely cured. He's able to function in ways that he previously could not function. Again, what's perfect, what's not perfect, that's another question. So ayahuasca is something that a lot of people are turning to explore for PTSD from sexual abuse, from war. And so there's whole movements around that. And a lot of people report a lot of success and make a lot of improvements. Again, what are their measures for improvements? That they've improved the quality of their life. How do you measure themselves against what is perfect? Who's the perfect one that doesn't have any triggers? It's hard to measure, but are they able to have healthy relationships? Do they have a healthy relationship with themselves? Are they able to experience their emotions in a more peaceful way? Are they able to deal with stress and possible triggers without freaking out and having a total meltdown? So psilocybin for PTSD, I'm not as familiar myself. I have not encountered that. Like, I know that people are exploring all different ways that the research with psilocybin right now. There is an anxiety. PTSD is technically a form of anxiety, but it's the end of life anxiety that they use for psilocybin for people who are dying of cancer. That's the research that they've done and shown that it really calms their anxiety about dying. So a little bit different than like getting over trauma. I imagine at some level, like all the different ones can be used in some different way effectively. So that depends. That's what I can tell you about that. Those are some of my thoughts. Let's see. Okay. Paul, relatedly, how do you feel the particular medicines in regard to healing? How important do you feel MDMA, mushroom cells, and ayahuasca all seem to work, for example? Is there intrinsic reason to choose one over the other? So, this all depends. And I think people have all their opinions and their flavors and all this stuff. And then they want to use AI to figure out who's the right one for this and who's the right one for that. And I don't think it's so simple as that, or I guess that's supposed to be really complicated. I think first of all, it's going to depend on the practitioner that you have access to. So let's say you're in Peru and you're in the Amazon and you're around these really advanced ayahuasca healers that are just really, really good. and they have experience with a very all wide range of problems, and they feel comfortable trying to deal with those problems, then yeah, in our case, we were taking all comers. We weren't worried about, oh, I have this problem. Should I go to this? Should I go do that? That being said, then how you deal with some people who, how gently you deal with some people. So some people need very gentle treatment. And so sometimes ayahuasca can be overwhelming for certain people. And so maybe something like MDMA would be a softer way for them to work through their trauma. And some people respond better to that. Some people respond better to ayahuasca. So it also depends very much on the individual. I think people are trying to develop that and figure out, oh yeah, we're going to figure out what's best for what. You know, this one's better for that one, and this one's better for this one. And they mix and match and all that stuff. But it really depends on the practitioner, I think. It has a lot to do with the practitioner. So for me, the reason I would choose one or the other, let's say for a family member, I've had somebody, oh, they think maybe they could benefit from this or that. It's going to depend on me, like who I have access to work with that person. Because it's psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. It's ayahuasca within traditional Amazonian plant medicine. Over focus on the substance, you know, is the problem with the Western society. They're not admitting that the healer plays a huge role in making them comfortable, helping them get through the experience. Laura, it is very common for Westerners when taking ayahuasca to uncover or remember the first time traumatic childhood events, including violence, sexual abuse, etc. How do you view these memories? Do you approach these memories in terms of healing? Do you see them as objectively true, or as archetypal or symbolic, or like a dream image? I've seen families suffer when these memories are revealed, shared as true. Your thoughts? So yeah, you can't verify them to be true unless you verify them to be true. So there's a lot of people that project into the space, and there's a lot of times that, like a dream, that things can present themselves metaphorically, that what might be a crossing of boundaries might present itself in a dream, like a perpetration, an abuse. And so although sometimes they are true, a lot of times they are not. Sometimes they are. And so when anyone at our center would have an experience like that, you know, we would guide them to not, you know, that you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt and really, you know, this is the integration process, and kind of digest and see how that sits with you and how that makes sense, or if it makes sense. And then you may have to explore. And some people go home and they talk to family members and they talk to loved ones, and they do reveal something that was there, that did happen, and it was important for them to see it and work through it. Other people, it may have just been a projection of theirs. So people have to be very, very careful with their visions and their concept, and that's one of the problems, is people get, you know, with a minimal experience, they think they know it all, and so it's just so intense, it feels so real to them. So it's supporting them around that, and being very, very careful not to literally interpret everything that happens, although some things that you uncover are literally true. Brad Adams, what are your views on the use of ayahuasca and other entheogens in the prison population as part of the rehab process? Are you aware of any other countries looking at this other than Brazil? Yeah, I'm only aware of the Brazil. I just saw the documentary about that guy in Brazil. I think it's Santo Daime Church, that they were working with prisoners with ayahuasca. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You know, that's really it's cool. I know that they thought about doing that in the early psychedelic research. I believe they wanted to go into prisons and work with people with LSD. And some people want to do that. You know, I think it's interesting. I think it's a positive thing. It's just as a matter of funding and resources and legality that makes it, you know, slows that stuff down. So in Brazil, where they have ayahuasca legal, and they have people who feel comfortable enough to take that on. You know, that's not a small task to deal with somebody who's may have really been through some major stuff, and guide them through ayahuasca. Alex, sounds like you're wanting to work with ayahuasca in a different context in the church setting. Specifically with ayahuasca, in addition to doing it in the Shipibo traditional plant via the Icaros, etc., you've learned. Is there anything different or new Native American traditions that you'd like to incorporate in your existing healing practice? So then this is one of the things, the church setting is focused on spiritual healing, right? So we have to kind of clear that up, that it's not necessarily going after like medical, although there's this medicinal use, and the use of the word medicine ancestrally here in the Americas refers to anything that can nourish our spiritual well-being. Songs are medicine. Prayers are medicine, dance is medicine, ritual is medicine. And so then sacred plants are also medicines that we can use for spiritual healing purposes. So in our church is a coming together of three primary traditions, which is the Shipibo tradition through me. Then Rodney Garcia is the keeper of the Pachacuti Mesa tradition that he studies from the Andes. And then we have the Navajo and Diné wisdom from Arizona, the ancestral wisdom. So we inform each other, but at the same time we respect each other's traditions, and so it's still like taking shape. So I haven't really changed the Shipibo ceremony yet. I'm still like sticking to it for the most part. We might allow someone else to sing a Native American song in the ceremony and do things that way, but mostly we're keeping to it. Just like if I go to Navajo, some of the ceremonies that we're doing, for example, like a blessing way is a very, it's an ancient Navajo tradition, no plant medicine, no psychedelics, but just prayer and song and ritual and gathering. And so they guide it, and I respect their tradition. So we like the ancestral connection. That's very important and useful for us. And that is part of this eagle and the condor. So it's not always about, there's reasons to throw out the baby with the bathwater, I guess, or not really. But in this the new tradition, the new movement, we're saying, let's reconnect it to people's roots, not just Native American roots, all roots, get them connected to origin. And so we think that keeping the traditions alive and letting people into the tradition, teaching people the tradition is going to evolve and change. But right now we're still focusing on pretty traditional. Thank you, Alex. Sarah Schwartz, what advice do you have for a psych student who plans to provide psychedelic assisted therapy in the future? Well, so it's just, you're gonna have to find out what's going on. I think my advice, what I'm a part of with Belinda and Naomi and Daryl and the medicine people that we work with, is that we think that there may be a growing need for this, is bring the ancestral traditions into your work. I would say that's something that's the next step. And I know we're just on that road, but it's the eagle and the condor kind of thing, where I do believe that ceremonial wisdom and knowledge and practice can help inform psychedelic psychotherapists about the spirituality and the energetics involved in psychedelic psychotherapy. So that you can, Albert Hoffman, I've been reading a little bit of some of his words, and he talks about how, transpersonal psychology, he was focused on that, like spiritually oriented psychology is the way that psychedelics are going to have the biggest impact. And he says that the cultures, the traditional cultures, well, they have that already going for them. They're already working in a spiritual context. So for me, I would say open yourself to the spiritual context and bring your heart and soul to it, and not just the mind and the cognitive blah, blah, blah. And somatic experience stuff is really big and is also kind of a big cross thing that's helping. There's all these somatic experience stuff that is helping bridge, whether that's somatic experience or breath work or, these other different things. Rachel Hope, what can you say about the pharmaceutical version of ayahuasca without the part that causes vomiting? Oh no, Rachel. So vomiting is not considered a side effect of the medicine in the tradition. And in every culture in South America that I'm aware of, the brew is named for the vine. Ayahuasca is the vine, and then you have the tea, you mix chacruna. Same is true in Colombia. Yahe is the vine, and then they mix chacruna or some other plant. In Brazil, it's capi, or they say natem. In other places, it's always the vine. And in the tradition of the Amazon, the belief is that the vine is the most healing part of it. So it's quite different from the psychedelic kind of attitude about what the healing process is. So the idea that the mystical experience or having a strong enough DMT is going to be the key to your breakthrough, they don't believe that. And I could say that I also, in my experience, don't believe that either, that some people who have really big experiences over and over again, it's not necessarily a sign of their progress. And for us, the vomiting and the purging, which is induced by primarily the vine, diarrhea, it's something that comes on when there's a toxicity in the system to deal with. So it doesn't always make you throw up. And at the beginning, a lot of times it does, it may not. And it's not all about throwing up. And I have many ceremonies where nobody throws up. So it's not just about the vomiting, but the vomiting is considered to be a very therapeutic part of the process. So we don't think it's necessary to get rid of it. What is the best way to integrate a plant medicine experience? Any actual tools, techniques we can use from anonymous attendees? I think there's a lot of different things people can do, as far as techniques and tools to do on your first is, I think, to have support. So I met somebody came to me the other day. It's just like they have the problem of they went away for a weekend experience. They had amazing, incredible, but then they came back and they couldn't talk to anyone about it. And they didn't have anyone to talk to about it, and they're just swallowed up by their lives. So I think it's extremely important to have support. So that could be a supportive community, that could be a supportive family, that could be supportive friends, that could be integration specialist of some kind, some healer or a therapist or a psychologist, somebody that's really focused, like professionally, on integrating people, or it can be being part of a spiritual community. So we have integration circles here in town in Phoenix where people get together, and it's been very effective. They get together in a large group and present some theme and topic, and then the group is broken up into small groups. So now you have 4 or 5 people that you can talk about. Every people go around and say, "Oh, what's going on? What do you want to talk about?" And using each other, using the community, which is a big part of how we do it down in Peru. Also down there, it's integration, and the diet and the tradition is thought to be, really wisely done in retreat. That you take some time out from your life and your society, and you go into nature, and you have time to contemplate and slow down and take a break. So you don't just, do the 2 nights on the weekend and then rush back Monday to your busy job. You take time out. So you have time out to rest, to integrate, to contemplate. And that process, people journal, people do all kinds of things. But for me, it's, there's so much more, and there's more people who are more expert in integration than I am. So I don't know if I'm giving you the perfect community as co-regulators for Coach Jeff. Paul's saying that's the traditional way. You help each other. So I think the social part of it is actually very important, very useful. So that takes us to avoidant and borderline personalities. It depends. It depends on the person. There are people that I've reported at one of the LAMPS events a while ago. A lady who reported very severe borderline history said that she really had a major healing with ayahuasca, not just one time, but regular kind of use for a while, and a lot of support. And she did make big breakthroughs. That being said, there are other people that are not ready to do that. And so it's hard to say. That's tough. Those are tough problems. It can help, but there's a lot that has to be in place to do it. Any suggestions about useful ways to bring the ancestral tradition to a psychedelic setting in a modern setting? Well, I think you have to go and have experiences with ancestral traditions to really explore that, So it's not just because of the key is not to do it like superficially, just you got this thing and you pick up this thing over here and you sit down on your altar and, you call out the 4 directions or whatever. I think it's more interesting to try to have experiences, to explore something in a more ancestral tradition, whatever that is, whatever you have access to, whether that's some European ancestral tradition that has more connection to origin and to nature, or if there's so many different ones, I suppose, that you could try to connect to. So it's not just limited to plant medicine shamanism, but just something with a deeper root and connection to nature that would help you, whether that's what's the word I'm trying to think of, Kundalini yoga, like tradition, something traditional, ancestral, multi-generational experience.
I actually had kind of a jumping off question from similar to that question.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone were interested in receiving some level of traditional shamanic training eventually, it's been a bit confusing to me what's the best way to go about that. Like, I've seen places online that offer quote unquote like shaman school for a price, which seems dodgy, but it also seems like they should be getting some sort of monetary exchange for their time and their knowledge. So it also kind of makes sense. But like,
Yeah, I think they should definitely. I don't know. I mean, people have that attitude of like, oh, you shouldn't charge for that, or they shouldn't mix money into that. But traditionally, there's always like one of the traditional concepts of the Native American stuff, the Quechua Aini, sacred reciprocity.
mhm.
That if you receive, you give. You know, you give something for something. Whether you take something from nature, you give back. And so there's always been an exchange.
Yeah.
Traditionally for people healers, they receive food or things for their shelter. So that's economics. That's simple, basic economics.
So
So,
that definitely makes sense to me, but it's like sort of
but
like,
if you don't know the people, so then there's a bunch of
mhm.
other shysters
Yeah,
that are out
exactly.
there. So this is like spiritual stuff, right? And so then how do you know if they are integrous people? And you don't. And so you have to have this isn't something that you can just figure out from the internet or from papers. It's like you have to kind of get personal contact. You have to talk to people, real people connected to this and connected to that. And so there's like intuitive levels of knowledge that you have to call upon. So if someone is really interested in that kind of stuff, it's not going to be like going to other school and program. There's other dimensions involved, and so you have to explore it. It's kind of like, you could have your yoga class, and you might have to try it out. You might have to go and try it out and see what they're about, and not just like sign. If they want you to sign up for some big program, pay all the money up front and blah, then no, I don't like it already. It's like
Okay.
if they're real, then you have an opportunity to explore and to meet them and see what that's like. And there's different ones like a shamanic school that is around that. Four Winds is something that I've met a lot of like very impressive practitioners from Four Winds, but then it became very, very expensive, and it was not accessible to people. And so then there's other people popping up from that school and other schools trying to make it more accessible. But I think there's a more organic side to it that you can't really get away from. And that's kind of the beauty of it, is allowing the nature and the life and the spirit to breathe again. And it's not as simple as just, filling out some application.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you too, Tara, for all of this. Carissa, how accessible do you think churches that offer spiritual psychedelic journeys will be in the future, especially as compared to the advances that have been made for mental health benefits? Well, supposedly, like the MDMA and the psilocybin are on fast track with the FDA. So those are going to be available within a year or two, is the idea, through healthcare facilities, that you could have an experience that way through your mental health, maybe even on your insurance one day through that. So that'd be one option. The churches would be another option. So the church is kind of like the peyote in the Native American church is the model that opened up that opportunity in the United States, and then UDV and Santo Daime with the ayahuasca. And then you have a whole number of people applying to be churches to be recognized so that they can get access for spiritual reasons. I'm doing that myself right now. I'm exploring that myself to do ayahuasca within a kind of research protocol that would be required for the FDA and to get it through like clinics and all that kind of stuff. I'm not really excited about that. I'm more interested in the traditional use, and I feel like it's more effective. And so in that sense, I think that the church option is still going to be an important option. And then you have the decriminalization movement, the third arm, so that you have medical, religious, and then decrim. Like, in other words, slowly, each one of these is just trying to legalize as much as possible the whole practice so that the options will be there for people if they so choose. What do you think about people who have done ayahuasca in a traditional concept for many years and are doing it on their own for various reasons due to COVID, financial, etc.? They're doing it on their own. What do you mean? What do you mean? I don't know what you mean. How do you give me more info? Is it possible? Chatting?
Let me see. If I open participate, can somebody, like, I know you're listed as anonymous. Can you raise your hand at all? I think there's an option in here somewhere to raise your hand, or you could just type it in as another question. Type the clarification in as another question.
Yeah, please. I don't understand.
We'll skip that one for this moment.
Sarah Schwartz, what's your opinion on ayahuasca for someone bipolar? It's pretty risky, I would say, high risk. So I have been part of that. So there's a guy, Benjamin Smudge, who's on the internet, who has bipolar, that is a researcher that has reported success with ayahuasca and a certain kind of approach and with a lot of care. But I have personally observed several people who were previously stable off medication with history of bipolar and manic episodes getting flipped into very serious manic episodes that required psychiatric intervention, that they like got lost in Peru or lost their jobs or their marriages and things like that. So I would say it's high risk is kind of my responsible answer. And it's really, I think I'm more curious about what about MDMA in that kind of situation? What do we know about that? I'm curious to know about that. Does MDMA, has it led to starting manic episodes or not? I'm very curious. So what do you think about people who have done ayahuasca in traditional conspiracies and are doing it on their own for various reasons? So I don't know. I still don't understand the question. I think it means that they used to go to ceremonies with some kind of guide, and then now they do it by themselves because they can't go to the groups anymore. And I guess it depends very much on the experience of that person. Many people who are very experienced with ayahuasca, eventually they drink by themselves. But I think that it really depends on the experience of the person. Generally not advised. Yeah. I mean, I say in general, that's how I have to talk. If I knew the person, and there's a lot of people that, who work with ayahuasca a lot, or they've been to a lot of ceremonies, and at some point it's like, okay, they're ready to do it on their own. And, but it's a question. What about using for bipolar 2 and not bipolar 1? So, these are interesting questions, and we don't really know. It depends. There's a risk. So one of the things that we try to gauge it off of is like, have they ever had a significant manic episode, like a manic episode where they, bipolar 2, bipolar 1, I guess there's different, the hypomania, maybe it's not as severe, but like how severe was their mania? Did they not sleep for days? Did they get into problems? Have they ever been hospitalized for mania? How have they tolerated psychedelics in the past? Do they have any experience with psychedelics? So those are tough ones. It's definitely not something you could just make a decision about over a little chat on the webinar. Those are tough. It's risky situations, and I think people should consider them risky because it's a real headache. What are my views on microdosing ayahuasca? Well, I don't know. People are beginning to microdose ayahuasca. I don't know a whole lot about it. There is a form of microdosing in the tradition where you do the dieta. So you do, like, let's say a month of restrictive diet, no salt, no sugar, no sex, no alcohol, drugs, red meat, dairy, spicy, all that stuff, no oily foods. And then people come down there, and then you do ayahuasca to diet with ayahuasca. And so you do just a little bit, they might do it every night, but just a very small amount that wouldn't really get you high. But the belief is that it would affect your dreams and kind of subtle aspects of your mind. So that's a way to connect with that. And so because they feel like it's a sacred plant spirit in the Shipibo tradition, that they would advise you to observe some kind of restrictions while you're doing like a microdose to really make the most of it. So that's a traditional kind of thing. People using it that way, even just the Vine, in the states that I'm aware of, I mean, they're using it as antidepressant and helping people through depressive episodes. So can you share a story of a profound or funny experience with ayahuasca that isn't in your book? Oh, Alex, trying to milk out some stuff. I'm trying to think of something that happened. I had a pretty cool experience. So here's what I think is really neat about like the shamanism side of things. So there's psychedelic psychotherapy. I've been through the MAPS training. I'm curious about psychedelic psychotherapy, and I think it's interesting. But I also think the shamanism is really special. And so, I mean, this is like prolonged, but just as an example, I was in Colombia There was a lady there who was having her first experience, kind of like first, not a lot of experience. I think she drank ayahuasca twice before. And then I went over to go check on her and sing to her. And she, I'm like, how are you? What's wrong? You know, are you okay? And she said, oh, just my stomach hurts. It's just, I feel a lot of stomach pain. And that's all, that's it. I don't have visions. I don't have anything. It just stomach hurts. Like a complaint, like we heard earlier in the questions, like what a drag. For us, it's like a healing process that they're going through. So then I was like, okay, now, let me try to help you with your stomach. And I don't know if this is going to be the best story because it's kind of convoluted, but I had asked her before, right? Like, what's wrong and what's the problem? And she runs this farm with her sister and her mom. But they fight a lot. The sister and the mom are like this big team against her, and they don't get along. But she has this ideas for the farm. She wants to do a spiritual center, but she's got to convince them. How do I convince my mom and my sister? I want you to help me. Like, use magic to help me convince them. And it's in Colombia, and people are really kind of into that kind of stuff down there. And I said, no, like I don't know about that. I'm not interested in that. But we could try to help, like, figure out what's wrong in your relationship with them. So maybe it's easier for you to talk to them about things. And so then I'm singing to her, and then I go down to her stomach, and she's also like, she presents herself very well. She seems really together and really kind of sweet and pretty and well dressed, and everything's nice. And then I start singing to her, try to see what's wrong with her stomach, like what's in there. And there was like this big orange cone, like just very pretty, very nice, but just covering, like shielding her belly. And so it just seemed like it was kind of blocked. Something's blocked. And there was an earlier question, somebody was asking about blocked memories, but anyway, something was blocked. So then with the songs, with the Icaro, the shamanism, so different from psychedelic psychotherapy. Now we're in the ancestral tradition, the magic of culture. You train in these ways that we don't have examples of that. So we don't believe that it's possible. We're not aware of that. But I learned about that, and I trained in that. And then I see that a lot of strange things happen. And I'm singing and trying to move the cone, get the cone out and about. And then the cone comes out. And then this like huge doll, like a Cabbage Patch, this dirty looking Cabbage Patch doll, really big, comes out. And then it's like, oh, so I'm like, wow, okay, wow, what's that? I don't know what that is. And then I have to like kind of get that out and kind of help release that, send it to the light. And then underneath that was a dead baby, like a possible abortion or miscarriage. So then we have a whole process of like trying to heal that energy and deal with that energy and help release that energy. So, I went through this. I had this huge experience, like singing to her, and it was just and it was odd. Like I wasn't expecting that. And then she goes, I'm done. And how are you? Oh, my stomach feels better. Okay. She didn't have any big visions at that point. Her stomach just felt better. And then the ceremony went to like midnight. And then around 1:30, we were still hanging out, chatting. She was in her room, and then her husband came over to me. He's like, you need to come talk to her. So I go over to talk to her, and I had kind of forgotten. I was like so in the zone. I forgot about all that stuff that I saw. And then she's like, oh, I need to hear what happened when you're singing to me. Like, I need to know what that was because something's really moving. And she was crying. So I told her, and then this whole thing with the doll, this Cabbage Patch doll. So then it turns out it's a long story, but I'm almost done. Her mom was with the dad, and he's an alcoholic, and he used to beat her up, and she did not want to be with him. And then she got pregnant, and she wanted to have an abortion, but she didn't. And she had him, and she tried to work it out with this guy, and he didn't treat her well. And then the guy fell in love with his daughter, and they had this beautiful bond. And then they had another child, the other daughter, and then she bonded with that daughter, and they were these teams. And then the dad died. And so now she was like the reminder of the dad to the mom and this team, and they were just like that, opposed with each other. And she never got like this love and caring from her mom. And then one day, there was some fad, like Cabbage Patch dolls, that you probably don't remember, a lot of people, but it was like a fad of dolls, some doll fad. Everybody had to have this one doll. And then they got all these same dolls for all the girls, except for they had one big ugly one. And then they gave it to this girl, and she couldn't stop crying. And so this lady, as a little girl, felt bad and gave her her doll and took the big ugly one. And in that moment was the first time she ever saw her mom like proud of her. So me telling her that story, that I saw the doll, that like opened up this whole thing of her remembering when her mom was proud of her. And then this connection, this emotional connection with her mom that she was having such a hard time with, and then realizing that her mom suffered so much and over the dad, and then on top of everything else, and she had already heard these stories that her mom wanted to have an abortion, and but she didn't want me, and then this lady had an abortion. And so I didn't say it like that. I said, because it's like the visions, what we talked about earlier. It's not literal, and I never talk about literal, and I'm not for that. That's a very inexperienced attitude, naive. But I just said, hey, I don't know. Have you ever lost a baby? I saw something. And she said, yeah, but she didn't want to tell me abortion, but the more we talked about it, the more it was clear, and the more it was like, well, you say your mom didn't want you, but you came to that same decision point in your life, and you did it, and your mom didn't do it. And then that opened this discussion and this idea and these tears and all this stuff about how she was going to relate to her mom and her sister. And it was pretty amazing. And so that's an example. That's kind of an interesting story, I think, for my friend Alex. I don't know how it sounds over the internet. Can I sing a short Ikaro? You guys are ridiculous. What time is it? 7:18. I don't know about that. I probably won't. But let me go to the other questions. Is plant medicine something to be explored by people needing healing only? If we feel that we are okay, can't uncover emotional pain that does not need to be uncovered. So plant medicine is not for everyone. It's not for everyone. Not everyone should do plant medicine. It's not for everyone. You don't need to go there. If you decide to go there and you think everything's fine, but like pretty much we always find something to work on. And that's not a bad thing, and that's not something to be ashamed of. And we with the right support, it's a good thing, because it opens. Sometimes those things leave blind spots in our lives, and there's always the part we see and the part we don't see. And so sometimes the plant medicines can help us to see that part and have us live more fully. It's not. There's these guys that I think it was Aubrey Marcus or one of those people. He was saying how they didn't want to, everything's going great. Like, I don't want to go down to Peru and find out that I should be a yoga instructor, and ruin my life because everything's going so good. And it's like, well, it's just, to me, what I've learned, and not just with plant medicine, but in life and in like Vision Quest and other things, is like what's deep inside of you is your favorite self, the one that laughs and is happy like a child. That's what's in there deep down. I really believe that, but it can be really messy, the healing process, depending on what's happened. And so if you're going to go down this route, you need a lot of support. So I am one of those high-risk people that due to PTSD cause mania, not bipolar. That is why I've not done ayahuasca. Can I participate? So that's, those one of those gray areas. It's like, okay, so you've had mania from PTSD. And so I've had people, some guy I talked to a while ago, he said he was misdiagnosed bipolar, had been hospitalized, was evaluated. They thought he was bipolar. We do see a lot of people overly diagnosed bipolar, but then he went through all this EMDR, which might be a good idea. I don't know if you've done that, but Rachel, but a lot of EMDR, and had some really amazing results. And his PTSD was largely, healed from EMDR, eye movement desensitization. I can't remember what the R is for. Response therapy, something like that. And so that was big. And then, so he's been stable all these years and says, well, I was never really manic, and it was always PTSD. I got misdiagnosed. Would you let me do it? And so then I was like, well, that's very, it's a very tricky question, very case by case type of thing. Ego and Condor is still not fully legal, fully functional. So we, just say no, because we're not ready yet to go public with what we want to do. So there is some room, it depends. It's case by case. And so like I said, there's a lot of ways to treat trauma. It's not just ayahuasca. And that's that. Anonymous entity once. Good story. Thank you, Laura. I was worried. The Icaro question, I don't know. I don't really feel like it right now. That's kind of how I feel about it. The Icaro for me is so, it's like a sacred thing, you know, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the interest and thank you, but it's just like, just to turn it on and off like that, it's not so easy for me to do it comfortably. And then I don't even know who's out there. I can't see anything.
Yeah, it's
So
probably pretty weird to do it like through
weird.
the internet to the screen.
I participated in these ceremonies. Like we did this. My friends have one that maybe I don't know if they're going to open it up that big, but there are some virtual ceremonies going on where people are singing Icaros. But I feel like it's too weird for me right now, and I'm sorry about that. How are we doing? There's still 8 minutes. Okay, but what was my favorite? That was my favorite vulnerability. Oh wow, what a good one. It's not necessarily just about vulnerability. That is vulnerable, like sitting in a maloca full of people. That's vulnerable. Sitting here alone in front of my computer it's not so much vulnerable as it is like I'm not inspired to sing. EMDR was great for cardiac surgery traumas in adulthood, but the deep trauma was untouched. Okay, for you, Rachel. Other people do. So then I'm very curious again. Like I raised the question about MDMA, you know, psychotherapy, where I haven't seen. I'm not aware of like the same kind of manic risk with MDMA. I may be ignorant, but I think it's an incredible way to deal with deep emotional trauma, and I've had people. I myself, well, I don't have like that same deep trauma as some people. I have my own little traumas. There's always somebody has more, worse. Mine's not that bad, but still, I've drank a lot of ayahuasca, and I went through kind of a underground training, did an MDMA psychotherapy session, and it was incredible. That was really, really amazing, and really helped me get in touch with some things that ayahuasca up until now it wasn't quite the same way. So I think there are options out there. Yeah. Are you coming on, Tara?
Yeah, so we've got 7 minutes. I probably just use it to do the wrap up since we were out of questions. Thank you so much for giving this lovely talk and answering everyone's questions. I learned a lot. Your story, I don't have a way to like talk inside the Q&A. I can only answer inside of other people's questions, which is why I didn't do like type my question. But I wanted to tell you when you were asking about your story, like it almost made me cry. Like I had a little tear right here. So it was a really good story.